there, you're listening to the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Creta Revere. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and if this is your first time here, thank you for selecting this podcast to listen to. As we begin today's episode, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and listen with an open heart. But first, the normal disclaimer. I am not a therapist or counselor. Nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. I like to begin each episode with a poem or a saying or a quote, and today I have two quotes. The first one is, "Grief does not obey your plans or your wishes. Grief will do whatever it wants to you, whenever it wants to. And in that regard, grief has a lot in common with love." That's by Elizabeth Gilbert. And the second is, "Just because you love me doesn't mean I feel loved by you." And that is by Mel Robbins. Today's episode is going to be a little different than the normal structure that you've become accustomed to by listening to this podcast. And that's in part because tomorrow's Valentine's Day, and I wanted to do something a little different in light of that. The topic of estrangement is heavy. It's a heavy topic, and lots of times there are big emotions and things like that. And I wanted to kind of do a little a different spin on it, if you will. And so one of my favorite authors and human beings in the world in general is Brene Brown, Dr. Brene Brown. And she's a researcher, and her latest book, The Atlas of the Heart, is one that came to me not long ago, and I've been busy perusing through it, reading it, and have come across several pieces that I just think are absolutely stunning and worth sharing. And while this book is not written in the context of estrangement, I feel that there's so much within this book that applies to estrangement. More so, the reflections on how did we get here and how do we get out of it, right? But first, I think the place to begin is we have to figure out where we're at first, right? And then we have to accept that we're here. It doesn't mean that we have to like it. It doesn't mean that it's right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just a fact. This is where we are. Today, right here, right now, I am in my home recording this podcast. It is what it is. It's a fact. This is where I'm at. Whether I'm happy about it or not happy about it. And as a matter of fact, today happens to be a beautiful sunny day here in the Pacific Northwest, and I am inside recording this podcast instead of being outside. So yeah, I'm a little miffed, but this is where I'm at, and I've accepted that this is where I am. So when we're in estrangement, I see so many parents and adult children to a certain degree just doing anything and everything in their power to not be where they're at. And that is estrangement, to not be in estrangement. And that has a variety of different looks based off of each individual person and their own experiences. So what I want to do today is to read some excerpts from this book and kind of chat along with how I see them applying to estrangement. And my purpose in that is I'm not trying to violate any copyright things. I encourage everyone to go out and buy this book. I think it's great, as all of her books are, Dr. Brene Brown's books, and I think can be very beneficial in some self-reflection and kind of figuring out how the pieces of this thing called life work and how they fit together and how your particular puzzle came to be and how the puzzle pieces fit or don't fit and are therefore causing an incomplete picture. So I'm going to read some excerpts from this book and kind of relay them back to estrangement. And I hope that you will gain some nuggets to think about, perhaps spark some curiosity, some things maybe that you've never heard of before, some things that you might have an aha or two. That's my hope for this podcast. With tomorrow being Valentine's Day, and I don't know about you, but when my kids were little, Valentine's Day was a pretty big thing, either for them being in school and they had to do the Valentine's Day cards and things like that. And then I usually always had some sort of gift basket or gift bag for each of my kids when they were growing up that they would get on Valentine's morning. And while I don't do any of that anymore, and that really stopped when the estrangement happened, it's something that I feel pulled back to. And the bottom line is love. I mean, to me, that's the reason we're here. Not here in, listening to this podcast and in estrangement, but that's the reason that we're here in life, is to love and be loved. And through that love, we experience connection and belonging. And that's what life is all about. To me, that's what life is all about. So you may hear some turning of pages and things like that in the background. I just kind of want you to know what's happening here. And so again, it's important to kind of figure out, where am I? What's actually happening here? So I'll start with the very beginning parts of this book. And Brene writes, Kirk told me, maps are the most important documents in human history. They give us tools to store and exchange knowledge about space and place. I know I'm a map geek, but when he said that, I got goosebumps. We are meaning makers, and a sense of place is central to meaning making. Where am I? How did I get here from there? How do I get there from here? These questions are central to understanding the physical world, and they're central to understanding our internal worlds. Whether we're looking at a map of Texas or reflecting on a tough conversation with someone we love, we need landmarks to orient us, and we need language to label what we're experiencing. And just like a map, the interaction between the layers of our emotions and experiences tell our story. But rather than elevation, roads, and water, human emotions and experiences are layers of biology, biography, behavior, and backstory. In order to recognize, name, and make sense of our feelings and experiences, we have to, 1, understand how they show up in our bodies and why. This is biology. 2, get curious about how our families and communities shape our beliefs about the connection between our feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. And that's biography. And number 3, examine our go-to behaviors. And number 4, recognize the context of what we're feeling or thinking. What brought this on? And that's the backstory. So again, I want to reread a sentence or two here. And just like a map, the interaction between the layers of our emotions and experiences tells our story. Rather than elevation and roads and water, human emotions and experiences are layers of biology, biography, behavior, and backstory. When we stop numbing and start feeling and learning again, we have to reevaluate everything, especially how to choose loving ourselves over making other people comfortable. It was the hardest work I've ever done and continue to do. I learned that taking the edge off is not rewarding, but putting the edge back on is one of the most worthwhile things we can do. Those sharp edges feel vulnerable, but they are also the markers that let us know where we end and another begins. I finally realized that trying to outrun and outsmart vulnerability and pain is choosing a life defined by suffering and exhaustion. I know running away from the pain and anxiety is way more risky than leaning in and locking eyes with it. When people are hateful or cruel or just being assholes, they're showing us exactly what they're afraid of. Understanding their motivation doesn't make their behavior less difficult to bear, but it does give us choices. And subjecting ourselves to that behavior by choice doesn't make us tough. It's a sign of our own lack of self-worth. I've also learned that when you hold someone accountable for hurtful behaviors and they feel shame, that's not the same as shaming someone. I've also learned that sometimes, even when the pain takes your breath away, you have to let the people you love experience the consequences of their own behavior. And that one really hurts. People will do almost anything not to feel pain, including causing pain and abusing power. Very few people can handle being held accountable without rationalizing, blaming, or shutting down. And without understanding how our feelings, thoughts, and behaviors work together, it's almost impossible to find our way back to ourselves and each other. When we don't understand how our emotions shape our thoughts and decisions, we become disembodied from our own experiences and disconnected from each other. This is my work within the world of estrangement and reconciliation, is helping parents and adult children to understand how emotions, as Brene says here, how our emotions shapes our thoughts and decisions, and how we come to have the emotions that we come to have, right? And I see this so much in estrangement. I mean, estrangement in and of itself is emotional, right? And all of those emotions that we feel drive our behaviors. And that is true for the parents, and it is true for the estranged adult children. If someone feels, sad and hurt and all of the negative emotions that you can think of, that is shaping their world. That is shaping their choices. And if it's an estranged adult child, their choice to estrange may be coming from that place. And so it's important to figure out where their emotions may be and how that might be driving their actions. It's not to say that you can necessarily do anything about it if you're a parent, right? But trying to have that understanding as to why they are doing the things that they're doing can help take the negative charge out of it, can help you to become less charged, less triggered by all of the things that estrangement brings, right? And then as you begin to become less triggered and less charged, and then that allows you to have some more calmer ways of thinking and being able to process information, and then be able to start mapping your course back to reconciliation, if at all possible. So one of the things that happened to me this week is I was asked a question by someone who said, what is the thing that you like best about yourself? And I thought, I don't know. That's a great question. Because, oftentimes we don't think about what we like best about ourselves, but we're really good at listing all the things we can't stand about ourselves. And sometimes we roll that over to our children, right? I can't stand that they talk this way. I can't stand that they're always angry. I can't stand, I just hate it when they do this, that, and the other thing. But I would encourage you to flip the script on that and to begin thinking, what do I love about myself? What do I love most about myself? What do I love most about my children or my child? And because that tends to put you into a different space mentally and emotionally. And so anyway, this question was asked of me, and my response relatively quickly was my willingness to be vulnerable. And when other people were asked, a lot of people were, said things like, their hair and their job and the way they work with others and things like that. But mine was vulnerability. And this is what Brene Brown has to say about vulnerability. She says, vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. Vulnerability is the emotion that we experience during times of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And this is why I feel like it is so hard for parents to get to a place of being vulnerable. Because estrangement is nothing if it's uncertain, right? If it's not uncertainty. I mean, it just reeks of uncertain. And so, it reeks of risk. If I reach out, I risk being attacked, or I risk not hearing anything, or I risk, if you're in the beginning stages of estrangement and you reach out, you risk a potential second estrangement or third or subsequent estrangement. And so there's lots and lots of risk involved. And there's tons of emotional exposure involved in estrangement. And so this is why it's really, really hard. Yet vulnerability it was the key, one of the keys to my being able to reconcile with my children. And so, and that came from my inner work, and things like that. So another piece to this is some of the things that, a quote I just want to talk about real quick is, I see parents, and I know that this comes from a place, and I know the children do it too, although I'm not in their groups because I'm not currently an estranged adult child, but I have been one of those, and so I know that this also comes from adult children as well. But when I see this, it really hurts my heart because I'm like, they're so far away from vulnerability when this is happening that it's like it just drives the chances of reconciliation further and further away. And that is nothing that celebrates the humiliation or pain of another builds lasting connection. And I see parents talk a lot about, the pain of their kids and things like that. Well, they'll get their due. Just wait till their kids are, old enough to abandon them. And that just does nothing good to help get you to a place where you are able to work in helping to rebuild, connection with your children. Another piece that I thought was interesting is what Brene wrote about sadness. To be human is to know sadness. Owning our sadness is courageous and a necessary step in finding our way back to each other. In our saddest moments, we want to be held by or feel connected to someone who has known the same ache, even if what caused it is completely different. We don't want our sadness overlooked or diminished by someone who cannot tolerate what we're feeling because they were unwilling or unable to own their own sadness. And I see this a lot in parents, that, when their children were growing up, I did it. I was not able to own my own sadness. And from the time my kids were really little to the time that my youngest one was still in high school and I went through a separation with my life partner. And I was just not able to cope with that sadness and own it and really process it and move through it for a very long time. And so I was not able to be with her in any of her sadness. And I see so many parents that have done that. And again, not intentionally, but it is something that we do as parents, and it cuts us off from our kids. So mapping our way back to getting us through estrangement and hopefully into reconciliation, but if not into reconciliation, then through the estrangement to a place where we can be with ourselves in a more joyful and healthy way, because estrangement does take its toll and wreaks havoc on parents as well as adult children. And so one of the keys to reconciliation in my book is empathy. And Brene writes, empathy is a tool of compassion. We can respond empathetically only if we are willing to be present to someone's pain. If we're not willing to do that, it's not real empathy. We need to dispel the myth that empathy is, quote, walking in someone else's shoes, end quote, rather than walking in your shoes. I need to learn how to listen to the story you tell about what it's like in your shoes and believe you even when it doesn't match my experience. This was absolutely key in my reconciliation with my daughters. And believe you, even when it doesn't match my experiences. Absolutely key. And that is a lot of what an amends letter is made up of, right? Is acknowledging their pains and hurts without explanation, without reason, without defensiveness, without any of this. And I heard something the other day and I just, my heart ached absolutely ached because this mother said, I wrote in a short amends letter, and I apologized if I caused my child pain. And I wanted to scream. It's not a matter of if. You did. You did. I did it. I did it to my children. Every parent does it. You do it because you're human. It's not a matter of if you hurt them. You did. And it's important to own up to that. It's important to own that. And to not justify it. To not say, but I was doing the best I could. Or one day you'll find out when you're in my shoes that I did the best I could. No. I apologize that I hurt you. It's that simple. I apologize that I hurt you. Period. Stop. Right there. Stop. So that gets us back to empathy, right? Believing that person, believing our children, even when their experience doesn't match ours. That is empathy. So the last two things I wanted to talk about were love and joy. And again, even if you're not able to make your way back to reconciliation with your adult child, I think these are two things that can serve you well in your life as you move forward with your life. And Brene defines, I'll just put it this way. She says, we need more real love. Gritty, dangerous, wild-eyed, justice-seeking love. We cultivate love when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known, and when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection. Love is not something we give or get. It's something that we nurture and grow. A connection that can be cultivated between two people only when it exists within each of them. We can love others only as much as we love ourselves. Shame, blame, disrespect, betrayal, and the withholding of affection damage the roots from which love grows. Love can survive these injuries only if they are healed, or only if they are acknowledged, healed, and rare. I don't know about you, but I think that's a beautiful definition of love. It's something we grow and nurture, and we can damage it. And we know that just from our adult relationships that are with our children. We can experience all sorts of ways that love is harmed. And we can also experience all sorts of ways that love is nurtured and grown. And I encourage you to find that for yourself, as well as every relationship in your life. And finally, we come to joy. And Brene says on the topic of joy, when we lose our tolerance for vulnerability, joy becomes foreboding. No emotion is more frightening than joy, because we believe if we allow ourselves to feel joy, we are inviting disaster. We start dress rehearsing tragedy in the best moments of our lives in order to stop vulnerability from beating us to the punch. We are terrified of being blindsided by pain, so we practice tragedy and trauma. But there's a huge cost. When we push away joy, we squander the goodness that we need to build resilience, strength, and courage. I invite you to sit with that, and I'm going to read it again because I think it is absolutely profound and huge. When we lose our tolerance for vulnerability, joy becomes foreboding. No emotion is more frightening than joy, because we believe if we allow ourselves to feel joy, we are inviting disaster. We start dress rehearsing tragedy in the best moments of our lives in order to stop vulnerability from beating us to the punch. We are terrified of being blindsided by pain, so we practice tragedy and trauma, but there's a huge cost. When we push away joy, we squander the goodness that we need to build resilience, strength, and courage. I don't know about you, but I think that is, again, profound, and I think that I see it so much. It took me a very long time to recognize that in my own life. I have a very dear friend of mine that talks about, when something good is coming into her life, she says, I'm rolling the credits before I've even had the screening or even the interviews for the actors and actresses. I'm already rolling the credits on how it's going to end. And I think that that's what this piece talks about. And we have to find the safety needed to be able to get back to vulnerability so that we can experience joy and know joy and embody joy without practicing tragedy and trauma. So this brings this episode to a close. I hope that you didn't mind the switch up today, again, from this book by Brene Brown. I just felt I felt called to it for this Valentine's Day. I know it's a time when many parents and many adult children feel loss and grief even more because it's a day of love, right? And we want nothing more than our children to love us, and our children want nothing more than to feel that their parents love them. But as the quote I quoted at the beginning of this episode today by Mel Robbins, just because you love me doesn't mean I feel loved by you. And I think that says it all. I think that wraps up a lot of what estrangement is for so many. So I hope that this time together was time you feel well spent, and that you're able to find some takeaway nuggets to help you on your journey, wherever you may be on your estrangement or reconciliation path. If you feel you've received something helpful or positive from this podcast, please consider following us, sharing this podcast with others, and perhaps leaving us a positive review. And lastly, if you're an estranged parent or an estranged adult child and would like to have your story shared on the podcast, anonymously or not, please reach out via email at theestrangedheart@gmail.com. Again, theestrangedheart@gmail.com. Until next time.